Ethics by Bria Tillman. This is a capstone advanced research project in liberal arts. The instructor is Robert Engelston, and the subtitle is A World Without Ethics. Imagine a world without ethics. What would that look like for you? Would it be full of corruption and deceit, lawlessness, total anarchy, absolute chaos? What would that look like for you? Well, that same question was asked to a group by the Ethics Center in 2016 of what would a society look like without ethics. So I just want to show a small clip of that interview here.
Oh, that's a good question. A world without ethics.
Oh, it's hard to imagine.
Fights and wars.
I think a world of hatred.
Cruel, very sad.
Misery, craziness, corruption, all the above.
A selfish world where everyone thinks about themselves.
It's sort of like lawless. If people aren't looking out for each other, you're pretty screwed.
Could be a little bit like we've got now. In a way, just worse.
Ethics defines how we should behave towards other people. The question of why should we be good, why should we behave well towards other people. In the absence of that,
There'd be chaos.
Chaos.
Anarchy.
Color. There will be no colors. It will be like
Lifeless.
you know, and then I think we have chaos.
Every day we have to contend with our own human urges.
Why shouldn't I kill someone? Why shouldn't I have lots and lots of sexual relations outside marriage?
I mean, I have impulses all the time, you know? I think we all do.
There is a point, an uncomfortable point that you pass over when you go against your ethics, that grates against you and you feel it.
It's almost like an unspoken code that guides everyone's behaviour.
It's about recognizing those and sort of deciding to live in a way that you can be proud of.
Ethics are what keeps the glue of society together.
Ethics should always be in the centre, in my opinion, of everything we do.
Ethics is really just an expression of that evolutionary biological imperative.
Because you can't just rely on law and government to police everything, so
It's a very important part of society and makes society livable and cohesive.
And if we didn't have that, we'd live in a capitalistic, liberalist nightmare of, trying to destroy each other, compete against each other,
To multiply that, that's what you'd have.
Donald Trump times 1,000.
So, after watching that, I challenge you to what would the world without ethics look like to you? Would it look like today's world? Are there any major underlying differences or similarities to what they've seen or what they've imagined the world would look like? Would it look like today? My claim here is that although I acknowledge that humanity has become more prosperous and more diverse and more interconnected, I claim that the lack of ethics and moral responsibility has led to an imbalance of world peace and cultural division. So, as I jump into this argument, I always want to start with defining ethics. And according to Oxford, ethics is the moral principles that governs a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity. So usually our ethics is our moral compass that we utilize when we encounter ethical dilemmas, and we sort of decide, is this right or is this wrong? Usually, when we have developed our ethics, we usually have a set of values and principles that governs our behavior. And usually, good values that we possess are love, honesty, kindness, and compassion, while bad values may include hate, lies, cruelty, and corruption. When we speak about ethics, it's important to discuss the stages of ethical development. So, as a child, ethics begins to formulate from the ages from 3 to 5. That's usually when we see children making those moral decisions and learning and are able to decide between what's right and what's wrong. Usually, that is developed through a consequence and reward system, according to Mr. Rest. Also, Mr. Rest discusses we see a shift as we grow into teenagers, where they usually operate outside the consequence and reward system, and they develop a sense of what the social norm is. And they govern their behavior or their choices by their desire to fit in or be liked. So they usually follow the crowd and go for what's popular at the time. So as teenagers develop into adults, we usually see another shift in ethical development where adults are able to operate from what they personally believe and what they hold in their morals and values, and they're usually not directly influenced by what's popular or what's in. They usually are independent from what the society is doing because they usually go with what they believe. And so I just want to emphasize the word usually, because not all adults are able to be independent from what's popular. Some of them are still in the teenager stage where they feel that it may be best to go with what's popular at the time. What's the problem with this? We all develop differently, and a lot of us are at many different stages, which is, expected since we're all different people and we all come from different backgrounds. But like I said earlier, some of us are stuck in this childish or teenage stage where, we don't want to think for ourselves. We rather go what's popular. And this can usually be where ethics go awry if we fall into the influence of being unethical. And so what do we see as a result of that? We see lack of ethical responsibility, lack of standing up for what is right. We see an imbalance of world powers and world peace, but also an avoidance, a comfortability with dysfunction, and a likelihood to ignore or pretend the current ethical atmosphere. All right, where can we find a lack of ethics in leadership, I would say? In the 2016 presidential election, we can note a shift in ethical standards. The current president has actually freely discounted others, spoke with no respect for diversity, humanity, and even women, and is also comfortable with publicly bullying others. And what's interesting about this is that most people sort of expect people in leadership positions to be the number one example of exemplifying what ethics is. And so, according to Nordhaus, he kind of shows us what leaders are supposed to possess, usually the 5 ethical principles. Those principles are building community, respecting others, serving others, showing justice, and manifesting honesty. And so this has really stuck out to me. I just want to kind of challenge you to compare this to our American president. Is he Is he showing these ethical leadership qualities? And why is the world okay with what we currently see from our leadership in America? Well, scholars at Penn State suggest that voters will cast a ballot for anyone who is the party that they support, no matter what they have done that may be ethically questionable. And so what we're experiencing now is an exchange for ethics to the morality of positions of power. So we're getting rid of ethics just to have power. But when we do that, we fail to understand that without ethics, we actually don't have power. We only have destruction. And so there are people who object this theory, such as psychologist Steven Pinker, who states that the world is the most peaceful that it's ever been. So how could we be in this unethical world? And, this statement is true because we have less death and mortalities and violence. But even Pinker goes on to admit that it may be too early to conclude such objections. Falk actually states that modern weaponry can inflict astronomical deaths in a total of minutes. So just because we have not seen that violence doesn't mean it can't happen. Falk also goes to state that all it would take is a homicidal leader who we all know exists. This is important because we are in a race for nuclear weapons, and this brace or embracement for nuclear weapons can be quite dangerous because literally there's people in the world who have the world in their hands. In a matter of seconds, they could destroy all of humanity. And so we have to be careful with who we allow to be our leaders, especially President Trump, who utilizes his Twitter to create false fears and anxiety within the American population. And so this comical drawing is very symbolic of what I just spoke about, that, we're too busy tweeting away and not really taking responsibility of how we're affecting those around us, especially in leadership positions. So I ask you a question: where will we draw the line? What is gonna stop us from allowing this disorder to continue? Well, what we can do is we can promote diversity, world peace, and share compassion for others. The visual that I show here is from the United Nations, and they are working hard to build these sustainable goals that will lead to a better world, such as no poverty and zero hunger and gender equality. We can speak up for what is right and stand up for what is right by voting to get leaders such as Trump out of office. We can exercise our ethical responsibility and not ignore signs of discrimination, unfairness, and lack of justice. We can also correct our own biases and evils towards others, and we can stand up for what is right when we're confronted with an ethical dilemma. How can we reverse the ethical atmosphere that we experience? We can educate the youth. We can educate our family. We can educate those who are around us. We should recognize that there indeed is a problem and that we must resolve it. We also should be aware that there is a problem and to fully acknowledge that it exists and not continue to ignore or avoid the situation. Lastly, we are successful when we understand that we are all part of one global community and that we all must unite to see world peace, which is a similar ideology from the Dalai Lama. And these are our references. And that is the conclusion of my presentation of ethics. Thank you.